These niggas ain't bigger than me. These niggas ain't Nas, ain't Jigger than me. These niggas ain't M, they ain't 50 to me. You ain't Pun, you ain't Pac, you ain't Biggie to me. These niggas ain't Crips, they ain't 60s to me. These niggas ain't Bloods, they ain't dripping with me. Niggas talking that shit by the new generation, man. Fuck these niggas, I slash your fucking faces. You niggas ain't so shit, not an album or a rock. Pussy nigga putting rings on my old bitch. Dick down the throat ass niggas, old hoe ass niggas. Happy cause you went gold ass niggas. These niggas ain't spitting with me. You ain't sicker than me. Fuck out my section, you ain't sitting with me. This for very important people. It's clear that we not equal. Clear you niggas faggots. I'm the Black Marshall man. Like yin 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 on a motherfucker. Who needs Hulk Hogan when you got Sting on this motherfucker? Less than 5 albums, kiss the ring on this motherfucker. California throne and I'm the king on this motherfucker. I don't wanna hear it. Weak ass lyrics, crying on the hook, thinking we gon' feel it. Oh, lost ass niggas, voice crack when you talk ass nigga, rolling blunts for the boss ass niggas. I came in with Ye, Jeezy and boss ass niggas. Your freshman cover a whole bunch of soft ass niggas. Tampon lyricists evacuate the premises. Mute BET ciphers cause I don't wanna hear that shit. May you rest in piss, you fuck niggas. Hey, Frank Ocean, go ahead, fuck these fuck niggas. Yeah, they fuck niggas. Ain't no 3 stacks in your class, so take your top 10 spot and shove it up your ass, bitch, boy. Niggas already fucked your bitch, you bitch, boy. And every time you kiss on that hoe, you suck my dick, you bitch, boy. And when you buy that hoe a bag, that bitch carry my bricks, you bitch, boy.
Man, what it do, everybody? ETM Hotel, Rennie, Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I appreciate everybody tapping in signs with Sean. Lafayette, Jama and Boca. Yeah, you know how we rock on the west side. You know what I'm saying? Having to be the best side, you know. But it's March Madness. The tournament is upon us. The first round is moving pretty quickly. There's already been a couple of upsets today. However, it is what it is. You know, Fordham did a really good job of, I think, setting the pace for the underdog this tournament, because that was more crucial than anything. Then we already had a 1-point game between Maryland and West Virginia. Anyway, we're here today because I was on Garfield's channel. He was replaying, I believe, the debate or a conversation between Jabari and some dude I never heard of before, but his name is Top Cat. And he's a so-called believer of the Aboriginal Indigenous movement. And that is his position that he takes. And pretty much his argument is the whole my mama said and my auntie said. It's not really too much into DNA. And he doesn't really know how to argue, but he tries to slander the Pan-African movement and those affiliated with it. And it's kind of crazy. So we're gonna get started. And what I want to do is I want to actually, from a scientific perspective, I want to approach this conversation differently, right? I want to deal with evidence. I don't want to deal with grandmama. I don't want to deal with your mama. I don't want to deal with your auntie. I want to deal with evidence. What evidence do you have to substantiate your claims? Is it only impactful when it comes to the Dawes rolls? Is that something that is a reality for you, or does this persist anywhere else? Let me see. Or is your other evidence is, if it's not the Dawes rolls, right? Which is, you know, y'all don't ever blame, y'all don't ever say, white man does to death too in that conversation, but they don't ever say nothing about how the Dawes rolls came to be and what led to it. So I'm interested into understanding people from that perspective. But if that's all that they have is he say, she say, then that's not substantial. Your cousins, this or that, right? So, you know, I want to get into the Dawes Act and its legacy, because that's That's also important. I'm gonna be here for a while. I'm gonna be talking pretty much, but I also got a couple of videos that I want to show everybody and kind of build on those as well. So if you here to learn, man, this is gonna be it. It's gonna be a great opportunity for you to learn. I'm also gonna be coming from a text. It's called it's called Science, Sovereignty, and the Sacred Text. It's called, now that's the beginning of the book. The rest of the book is called Paleontological Resources and Native American Rights. So it's by Allison M. Ducis in 1996. This is the citation, and I'm going to drop it on people in the chat what I'll be dealing with. All right. Now, I'm going to give the name again because I do understand that a lot of people aren't familiar with work, the research and efforts that the people have put into fully understanding the identity of the people who was here, right? So before Clovis, there were people here before Clovis. You know what I mean? And we know them people ain't no black people. So we're gonna get into that. And I'm gonna do this from the Paleo Indian era to Clovis. From the Clovis era to Christopher Columbus before colonialism, well, the complete history of Indigenous America before colonialism around 1491. So I'm gonna need your patience. If y'all busy working, this will be cool for y'all. If y'all are out doing stuff, this will be cool for y'all. But I'm gonna get to work. So um, let me go ahead and share my screen. Now I kind of led into this in a conversation that we had before, but people weren't paying attention to it when I was actually dealing with the text. And because, let me see, Chrome tab, let me do my Chrome tab the way I need to, because y'all already know this new share option is beast mode for me now since I know how to work it. But I tried to introduce y'all to this before regarding the text. I don't know if you can see the screen if it comes up, but remember the book I put y'all on, Origin, a Genetic History of the Americas. I'm gonna put the book on the screen. I don't know what just happened. Let me stop sharing. But it just told me the something wasn't healthy. Oh, well, it looked like when I went on the website to try to show y'all something was seized. So, go back to safety. Let me show y'all this book. Oh, that's another something. Oh, shoot, I ain't even need it. Share screen, entire screen. All right. So remember, I put this text on the screen for y'all. When I put this text on the screen, it's actually a real deal. It's real deal. This is real deal, right? When people so-called the Aboriginals, the indigenous people, they claim to be here, well, there's a substantial amount of evidence that's being argued or communicated right here in this book that tends to set the narrative. All right, so hold on 1 second for me. I just been bombarded. Tyson is in the building. So let's deal with what we need to deal with. And then I'll reshare when I need to do the audio. All right, so the Paleo Indian period was between 6,000 and 8,000 BC. Now, this is just a summary, but we can go a little bit further. So I'm gonna read the summary, but we can go further, right? Tyson, shut up. We can go further and get into, look, you see it, material culture, meaning we have evidence of a material culture. We even have evidence of the economics, politics, and religion around these Paleo Americans, right? So we can get into it. There are settlements. Now, the reason that I'm showing you this, because this is Virginia based. I'm gonna say that one more time. This is in Virginia. What we know of Virginia today. Yes, this is also the book that was also in my Wisconsin stuff. Yes. So the Paleo Indian period was between 16,000 and 8,000 BC, came toward the end of the Ice Age, a time when the climate warmed and the largest mammals became extinct. Likely having originally migrated from Asia, the first people in Virginia were hunter-gatherers who left behind lithic or stone tools, often spearheads. At the Cactus Hill Archaeological Site, and I'm gonna take y'all to this site in a minute, in Sussex County. These date back to 16,000 BC, well before the better known Clovis culture. The so-called Paleo-Americans likely banded together in groups of 30 to 50 and located themselves near high-quality stone resources, especially in Dinwiddie and Mecklenburg counties. While keeping a base camp, they may have established smaller settlements for more specialized tasks such as tool making and hunting. The bands probably lacked central leadership, moved up often, and traded with one another. Based on the religious practices of the later Virginia Indians, they likely were animists, investing various natural forces with spiritual power. So this is, we in Virginia with it right here. The first source of the Paleo Indian. That ain't it, because I'm gonna move you from Virginia. If you looked at the Wisconsin video, you know that we had Paleo Indians in Wisconsin. If we move away from Wisconsin, I can show you Paleo Indians in North and South Dakota. If I wanted to be an asshole and go further than that, I can show you Paleo Indians in California. My point of what I'm saying is that these people migrated from the Bering Strait. This is evidence of migrational movements. This is evidence of a people coming into and populating North America. But that ain't the only way that people came, because there's an article out there that will argue and say the first peoples to hit the new shores arrived on boat, and they came near Mexico. And they're adding additional evidence for that. So, who are the Paleo Indians? It ain't no Aboriginal, Indigenous, Negro who just started this shit in the 20th century. They're not indigenous to nothing. Siberian, Asian, and Indo-European, or however you want to get them credit for being. Now, let's get into something interesting here. The people. I ain't gonna get into nothing else. The first humans arrived in Virginia sometime at the end of the Ice Age. I'm gonna say that again. The first humans arrived in Virginia sometime at the end of the Ice Age, or the Pleistocene Age, having migrated from Asia to where? North America, either by foot across a natural land bridge or more quickly by skirting the Pacific coast in watercraft. For many years, scholars assumed that these so-called Paleo Indians were the ancestors of Virginia Indians and brought with them Clovis culture, named for the lithic or stone projectile points first found in Clovis, New Mexico in 1932. Studies of early skeletons, however, suggest that these first Virginians were different in appearance from later Indians, leading some research to dub them Paleo-Americans. Meanwhile, evidence from the Cactus Hill site in Sussex County, where a small group of people lived on the hill overlooking the Nottoway River, suggests that Paleo-Americans were in the eastern Virginia as early as 16,000 BC, or well before the emergence of the Clovis culture. Do I really need to give you the environment? I'm gonna let y'all get into that yourselves. So let me move on and be a little bit more discreet in this I'm still on whole screen, I think. Let me make sure that y'all can see whole screen. Yep. So let's talk about Paleo-Indian culture. The last great ice age began 60 to 70,000 years ago and grew to cover up most of Canada and the land in the areas of the United States. Included in the Great Sheet of Ice was the Great Lakes area, New York, northern parts of Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and all of New England. This freezing period reached a peak around 16,000 BCE, and by 15,000 BCE, a warming trend had started. So much water was frozen that the ocean was 400 feet lower than it is today, and much of the continental shelf from New York to Nova Scotia became exposed to land. By 12,000 BCE, all of a sudden, New England and all the lower parts of New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont lay exposed as the glaciers melted. The current view of the Paleo-Indian period envisioned bands of hunters entering North American continent around 17,000 years ago. 15,000 BCE, by crossing a land bridge that connected eastern Siberia with Alaska. The land bridge was exposed during the late Pleistocene by continent-sized glaciers, which, when created, drew water from the oceans, lowering sea levels by some 120 meters. It would appear that these same glaciers prevented these immigrants from expanding across the entire North American continent until 16,000 years ago, or 14,000 BCE. The best diagnostic archaeological evidence. I'm going to repeat just so people can fully comprehend that we're talking evidence over here on this channel. The best diagnostic archaeological evidence for these early Paleo-Indians bands are long, fluted chip stone projectiles points, as shown on the screen. These early points are named Clovis after Clovis, New Mexico archaeological site with the point type was first recognized in association with the late Pleistocene fauna. With only a few hundred years after 12,000 BCE, the Paleo-Indian appear to have occupied most of North American continent and the southeast. Since 1960, though, archaeological studies of the river basin projects, as well as the statewide studies of Paleo-Indians point finds of site distributions in the southeast have led to refinements in the sequencing of the point types and attempts to reconstruct Paleo-Indian cultural activities. Excavations at the Paleo-Indian sites, better dating techniques, and the study of distribution of Paleo-Indian point types in late Pleistocene environment have led archaeologists to develop new models for Paleo-Indian occupation of the Southeast, now broken down into 3 sub-periods. Here are the sub-periods. Now, I showed y'all this the other day. You got early Paleo-Indians, middle Paleo-Indians, late Paleo-Indians. All right? So that's what we're dealing with right here. So we have archaeological evidence and paleontologists and archaeologists on the job with supportive evidence here for what we're dealing with. Next source. All right. So again, this is Paleo-Indian period, 10,000 to 14,000 years ago. Talks about the first inhabitants. The first inhabitants, although very little is known about the Paleo-Indian period, The evidence for man's presence in North America around this time is overwhelming. Traces of the old world upper Paleolithic culture from many archaeological sites in the New World indicate that this region was populated during this time by the people whom we are calling Paleo Indians. However, despite careful excavations of numerous sites, archaeologists are still uncertain about the Paleo Indian tradition in everyday life. This is mainly due to the lack of organic artifacts, which cannot withstand the passage of time. They only have a selected few, and they are showing them on the screen, those spear tips and how they utilize them. This is what they know best at that period. Now, flint knapping, a stone tool shaping technique invented by ancestors that existed long ago, plays a major role in the lives of Paleo Indian people. We're talking evidence here. I can't do the talk. I got evidence. Spear points were crafted striking a piece of shirt or flint methodically. Sorry. Each stone point would take a considerable amount of time and effort to complete. One of the earliest examples of such a tool is the Clovis point, a large lance-shaped spear point with a flute, a groove-like flaking scar extended 1/5 to the third of the way up the faces of the blade from the base. The edges on both sides of the base were purposely dulled to prevent the bindings from being cut when the point was being hafted or attached to a foreshaft. These foreshafts were probably set into a socketed wooden spear handle, allowing it to be thrust into an animal and then pulled free, leaving the foreshaft embedded in the animal's flesh. In the later part of the Paleo Indian period in the southeast region, the lance-like prominent, while the bases became increasingly concave, often resulting in the flaring ears. Examples of these points are Quad and Dalton points, which are very similar in shape. Boom. I'm gonna leave it right there. We know why they had this spear shape thing going on. They trying to kill what they're trying to kill. But let's go a little bit further. Boom. Here we go. So mentioned it earlier. I'm gonna give it back to you. In a 2017 article written, most archaeologists think the first Americans arrived by boat. Now they're beginning to prove it. So I'm gonna play this video right here. Hope we don't get no striking while playing the video. I already played the copyright. It's only 3 minutes. Hold on, y'all. I forgot. I gotta unshare, reshare for y'all to get the audio. My bad. Oops, my bad. It was good stuff too. I ain't even gonna cap.
Until 20 years ago, the prevailing theory for how the earliest human settlers arrived in America came down to one thing: big game. It was thought that humans followed megafauna, such as mammoths and bison, across the Bering Strait and through an ice free corridor down into North America around 13,500 years ago. These early humans, the Clovis, left behind spear points with telltale grooves, evidence of their big game hunts. But this theory collapsed when evidence of human occupation dating to 14,500 years ago was found at the Monteverde site in Chile, 1,000 years before Clovis points appear in North America. This gave rise to a new theory that humans may have traveled by boat, starting in Beringia and sailing down the coast some 16,000 years ago. Since the discovery at Monteverde, researchers have turned their attention to the Pacific coast in search of early sites. Cedros Island is practically brimming with archaeological evidence for an early American culture that had mastered coastal environments. Stone tools and clamshells found at several sites on the island were radiocarbon dated to between 11,000 and 13,000 years ago. Not quite pre Clovis, but getting there. In the hunt for evidence of these early settlers, researchers have been searching not only on land, but also under the sea. As the ice sheets covering North America began to melt around 16,500 years ago, the sea level rose 120 meters, likely swamping any early settlements along the Pacific coast. To uncover these drowned settlements, researchers tried to deduce the location of these settlers' most important resource: fresh water. They started mapping the ocean floor off the coasts of Oregon and California in search of evidence of ancient riverbanks and estuaries. By taking core samples of the ocean floor where these riverbanks lie, researchers hope to understand these lost environments and perhaps even eventually find evidence of early human occupation. As the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, parts of the coasts of British Columbia and southwestern Alaska rose as well, no longer bearing the weight of the massive sheets of ice. The consequences of this geological quirk can be found on Calvert Island, where the sea level rise was as little as 2 meters, leaving easily accessible evidence of coastal settlements. Here, researchers found 29 footprints preserved in clay, buried underneath a half a meter of soil. A piece of wood embedded in one of the footprints allowed them to date the footprints to just over 13,000 years ago. More evidence has been found on nearby coastal islands: 12,700-year-old spear points left over from a bear hunt, and 14,000-year-old stone tools left next to a hearth. Clues that the first Americans made their way down the coast by boat continue to present themselves, but archaeologists aren't ready to confirm the theory just yet. A string of well-documented sites along the coasts of southwestern Alaska and British Columbia, dating back to at least 15,000 years ago and extending through time down the coast, will be needed to truly prove the coastal migration theory. Until then, archaeologists in both North and South America will continue the hunt for signs that the earliest Americans were indeed a seafaring people.
All right, so that's the science joint, but they also put the article out to bag themselves up, of course. So it deals with the Cedros Island in Mexico, which is a focal point for their argument, and up and down the coastlands of the Pacific or California area. I'm not going to go over this since we actually listened to the video and they kind of laid it down in the video what they're dealing with. But as you can see, that archaeological sites along that coastline, looking for and excavating sites for evidence of early humans in that period, and then dating those things. So the evidence that might settle the question has been mostly out of reach. As the glaciers melted starting around 16,000 years ago, global sea levels rose, everything that he basically said in the video. So they continue to do this. For that evidence is now in higher gear. So there's a dedicated team of people that are after that evidence, and every year they get more and more evidence, right? So here's where we are now. I'm gonna drop some on y'all. This in this particular article. Of course, it's all in the description of the video. But the oldest fish hook discovered in the Americas, as reported this summer in American antiquity, 11,500 years ago. What happens when we have conversations with people who claim to be indigenous to this land or quote unquote aboriginals is the lack of sufficient evidence, culture, and when I say evidence, I mean archaeological evidence, paleontological evidence, right? We don't anthropological evidence. They don't have any. They don't have anything that could actually prove their existence. There's no material culture, no gods, no nothing, no staple foods. But I heard an idiot today on Garfield's show call in to the, because Sonetta does call in. Garfield replaying it. An idiot calls in and then says that he don't see remnants of West African foods and culture in the Americas to represent and say that that black people were Africans were enslaved and brought to the Americas. There's a book that he needs to read. It's called Africanisms in America. In that text alone, we ain't got to mention nothing else, but in that text alone, it kills his entire argument. Because in that text, it tells him that people was hiding seeds of many different types in their hairstyle, the women in their hairstyles. They brought with them other specifics to represent culture. Then he talked about the language. Well, we see remnants of scripts and signs and sacred symbols that was actually used over here. So he was tripping with no map. Now, let me progress forward. So earlier, well, let me do the big thing first. Yeah, because I want to, and then I'll come to what I need to come to. So I'm gonna do the big thing first. And I ain't gonna be talking, I'm gonna let this talk. So this is the article. Clovis debunked. America's first settlers did not take the ice in the ice-free corridor. So we just talked about that from the science article. The science article was 2017. This is a more recent article, so I wanted to bring out a speed 2020 source, and in 2023 we should have some more information coming. Wow. Hey,
techniques, including
man,
radiocarbon and
hold on.
cosmogenic exposure dating. One article published in 2016 by Cambridge University Press aggregated radiocarbon.
Clovis debunked. America's first settlers did not take the ice-free corridor.
Y'all can hear it now.
In the 1930s, archaeologists discovered Clovis culture spear points on the Great Plains. These hunting tools were found next to the remains of mastodons, mammoths, and several extinct species of bison. The points were dated to around 11,000 years, making them the oldest fossil evidence for settlement in North America ever discovered at that time. It was an exciting discovery, one that refreshed debate on the migration patterns of early humans. The question of when and how ancient humans arrived in the Americas is one of the biggest, most enduring mysteries of early human migration, all for the simple reason that North and South America separated from the other continents more than 80 million years ago. In the 16th century, a Spanish Jesuit scholar by the name of Fray José de Acosta theorized that the ancestors of today's Native Americans crossed over from Asia on dry land that had since become submerged. Future generations of researchers adopted de Acosta's belief that America's early settlers traveled on foot and pointed to Beringia, a land bridge that once connected Alaska with Northeast Asia, as their likeliest point of entry. This otherwise convincing story had one major plot hole. For much of the late Pleistocene epoch, Western Canada was covered by the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, which would have blocked access to the Great Plains. To circumvent this plot hole, archaeologists like W. A. Johnson and Marie Wormington developed the bold but seemingly incontestable hypothesis that early humans chased their megafauna prey through an ice-free corridor that had briefly formed between the ice sheets and stretched through Alberta and British Columbia into the modern-day U.S. This, the academic community concurred, was the most probable explanation for the Clovis culture spear points. The Clovis first hypothesis, as this idea is sometimes referred to, has long dominated discussion on early human migration into the Americas. Although many new research projects, from advances in our understanding of glaciology and plate tectonics to recent discoveries of even older fossils in parts of Central and South America, called this hypothesis into question, it has never been successfully debunked. That is, until now. Putting a hypothesis to rest. The reason that researchers took more than 60 years to verify whether the ice-free corridor was used by ancient humans is that, for most of that time, they lacked the knowledge to do so. As Lionel Jackson and Michael Wilson state in their literature review, attempts to verify the Clovis first theory have relied on recently developed analytical techniques, including radiocarbon and cosmogenic exposure dating. One article published in 2016 by Cambridge University Press aggregated radiocarbon dates of the ice-free corridor from previous archaeological, geological, and palynological studies to determine that the corridor was not feasible as an early route until after 11,000 BP, or after the appearance of Clovis south of the continental glaciers. This article confirmed widespread suspicion that the corridor was too inhospitable for early humans to have traversed. Another study, published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences last March, provided even more convincing evidence that the Clovis first hypothesis was incorrect. A team of researchers led by Oregon State University professor Jory Clark calculated the ages of 64 rock samples gathered from Alberta and British Columbia, the same region where the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets are believed to have separated. We used a method known as cosmogenic nuclide exposure dating. Louise Guillaume, a graduate geology student from Imperial College London who contributed laboratory work, explained in a press release posted on the school's website. Cosmogenic exposure dating is a rock clock that essentially tells us how long rocks have lain exposed on Earth's surface, after a glacier has retreated and left them behind and uncovered, for example. Using this rock clock, Clark's team was able to date the opening of the ice-free corridor to about 13.8 thousand years, give or take 500 years. Even with this gracious margin of error, the study proves that the corridor did not open until after after North America was already populated. "We have closed the door on the ice-free corridor," study co-author Dylan Root announced in the aforementioned press release, adding they had successfully put the Clovis First theory to rest. The ice-free corridor opened similar to a zipper. Although the study indicates that some parts of the ice-free corridor had opened up as early as 15,000 years ago, the corridor as a whole did not become ice-free until long after people arrived in the Western Hemisphere. Clark told Imperial College London that the corridor's opening was similar to a zipper and that this zipper was opened from the bottom first, starting down south and then unzipping from the top. There are other studies that argue the Clovis First hypothesis was incorrect. In the past few decades, archaeologists in South America discovered evidence of human settlement on the continent that is much, much older than Clovis points. Bone, charcoal, and sediment samples recovered from the Chicowite Cave in north-central Mexico by the Autonomous University of Zacatecas in 2012, for instance, were dated to 26,000 years, but may be as old as 33,000 years. The Chicowite Cave joins a half-dozen or so other excavations from Central and South America that predate the opening of the ice-free corridor. Equally ancient remains were found in the Andes Mountains, the Amazon Basin, the Patagonian steppe in Argentina, and on the Caribbean coast. On the evidence of these early archaeological sites from more than 13,000 years ago, yet another literature review echoes, the Clovis First model must be discarded. Of course, discarding the Clovis First model means that researchers must once again confront the intimidating question of when and how ancient humans arrived in the Western Hemisphere. As popular support for one hypothesis decreases, interest in another rises. Clark's article leans in favor of the Pacific Coast Migration, or Kelp Highway, model, which proposes that America's earliest settlers traveled down the Pacific coast rather than through the heartland of Canada. Due to rising sea levels, the coastline along which these primordial pioneers may have originally journeyed is well out of current archaeological reach. Still, excavations from different parts of the world, including evidence of maritime transportation in Greater Australia, which may have been colonized by people using watercraft as early as 50,000 years ago, make the Pacific Coast Migration model look equally, if not more probable, than the Clovis First hypothesis.
You will fail. So what? Everybody
All
does.
right, so basically we have what we have here. So we're moving backwards. And now we're going to get a little bit more into the Clovis culture, and we're going to deal with it. So we started with Paleo. We started with Paleo Indians. From Paleo Indians, we get into the Clovis. From the Clovis, we're going to get a little bit more of the Clovis, and then we'll get into some other stuff. But what I'm trying to do is to get you to see that people have not always been here. What we have is the first peoples being here ain't got nothing to do with the people that makes the claim that they're indigenous to being here, because they're not, and they're being culture vultures, and then they make asinine arguments.
13,000 years ago, the Americas were a much different place. Tusk-bearing Goliaths and ferocious beasts roamed the land. This cold world was ruled by tooth and claw. However, a new predator armed with stick and stone appeared. It would adapt to the many challenges of the new world and create new, deadly technology. Their ingenuity would allow them to spread rapidly and conquer the lands. But their time was short-lived. Their world was changing, and the golden age of the Clovis would end as quickly as it began. Now, thousands of years later, we are left with many questions regarding the settlement of the Americas and the great cultures that once flourished. To understand the significance of the Clovis culture, we must first gain an understanding of the initial settlement of the Americas. It was once thought that the Clovis people were the first people to have entered the continent a little over 13,000 years ago. This was due to the lack of sites that predated Clovis, along with the fact that Clovis technology was the obvious predecessor to later technology in the Americas. This hypothesis was dominant throughout the second half of the 20th century. However, the discovery of multiple sites predating Clovis by hundreds or even thousands of years have changed the scientific consensus. There are sites in the Americas that may date to over 30,000 years, though they remain quite controversial. The Pedra Ferrada sites of Brazil have yielded artifacts and evidence of fire that date to between 48 and 32,000 years ago. Though the remains of fire may have occurred naturally, and the artifacts are so primitive that they are likely just rocks that broke from falling or even broken by capuchin monkeys. The Topper site of South Carolina preserves Clovis artifacts, but underneath them are artifacts that some claim to be as much as 50,000 years old. Here
Looking at the chat.
Here, artifacts are once again extremely primitive, and most believe they are not artifacts at all, just naturally occurring rocks. Another site that was just recently published contains the remains of mammoths which may have been butchered 37,000 years ago. However, once again, the remains are uncompelling and the bone may have just been broken by natural processes. The oldest compelling evidence of humans in the Americas would be the footprints preserved at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. Here there are human footprints dating to between 21 and 23,000 years ago. This date is not surprising considering we have discovered a number of pre-Clovis sites dating between 15 to 20,000 years ago. It remains unknown how long humans have been in the Americas. Though there are earlier, highly controversial sites, the evidence is quite poor. Genetics of modern Native Americans tells us quite clearly that their ancestors diverged from the Inuit around 17,000 years ago.
Listen very closely. Listen to what he says very closely. As the supporting evidence I've shown in the Paleo Indian substantiates what he says right here.
Though there are earlier, highly controversial sites, the evidence is quite poor. Genetics of modern Native Americans tells us quite clearly that their ancestors diverged from the Inuit around 17,000 years ago.
The ancestors emerged somewhere in between 17,000 years ago. That's the paleo, that's in the Paleo Indian. Come on, man. I don't even know what you're talking about, Trey. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you mean by your question you asking in the chat, brother. At all. I don't even know what you're talking about. What would make you what would make you ask me that? I'm gonna continue for everybody else that's learning.
Then between 16 and 13,000 years ago, their population grew enormously, about 60-fold. This population boom is indicative of expansion into new territories. The genetics of New World dogs also suggests that they rapidly diversified during this time. Genetics therefore prove that the Americas did not become extensively inhabited until this wave of people moved in. There may have already been some people in the Americas before them, but they left very little behind archaeologically and nothing genetically. Genetics also tell us that these people moved throughout the continent very rapidly. The oldest human DNA to be sequenced in the Americas comes from the 2-year-old Anzac 1 of Montana at around 12,600 years
Now I'm gonna
old.
pause the video and I want everybody to look at the people in the background of this image right here. Look how sacred this ground or this land is to the people that are back there. Do any of them people look like TP? What was dude name on Top Cat? Chief Top Cat. Any of these people. Now, mind you, none of these people that are at this site where they extract DNA from a 2-year-old look anything like these so-called black Aboriginal indigenous people. But these people, their DNA tells a story. They have no problem with DNA. The only people that have a problem with DNA are people that are 2016 and above Aboriginal, indigenous black people in America. They are the prototypical, right? Prototypical, typical, as Khalil says, scam gods. None of them. He don't favor none of these people. But look at them. Now, this is no public photos of the boy exist and the remains were reburied. They reburied. They extracted the DNA from the 2-year-old from that site. They gave the people that's in the background of the photo the remains, and they did a sacred burial on behalf of the 2-year-old.
"6,000 miles south in Brazil, the remains of people from the Lagoa Santa site were shown to be very closely related to Anzac I. This original migration quickly spread across the Americas, dominating all sorts of environments. There are multiple theories on how people originally arrived in the Americas. The dominant theory is that migrations of people from Northeast Asia crossed down the Bering Land Bridge and then crossed down into the Americas. Many seem to picture Beringia as a narrow passageway, but in reality, this land was twice the size of Texas.
Hmm.
People may have lived here for thousands of years before migrating into the Americas. Unfortunately, many sites are now likely covered in hundreds of feet of water. This complicates our understanding of the passage throughout these lands further. Ancient Beringians would not be able to have just walked into the Americas during the last glacial maximum. There were large glaciers covering most of modern-day Canada that would have been impassable. This opens the door to two other theories: the coastal migration hypothesis and the interior route hypothesis. The interior route hypothesis posits a migration along an ice-free corridor between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets. The problem with this hypothesis is that the interior route may have been sunk beneath a massive lake, and the corridor in general may have been devoid of resources. Another problem is that the corridor is only thought to have opened up after people were already living in South America. Still, new migrants possibly came later through this corridor, though evidence is largely in favor of people expanding back into Alaska after this corridor
Let
opened
me
up.
pause the video again. Now, I'm not going to show the whole video because that'll take a lot of our time. But what I've actually done is walked us right into a people that have evidence of their existence of being here thousands of years ago. Not 500, not 600, thousands of years ago. What is that evidence? Look at the screen. Stone tools. Stone tools. Stone tools. DNA. Certain sites, specific sites. I showed you Paleo Indian from the Virginias. And I told you that I can get them all the way over to Cali. But now we're in the Clovis period. I'm going to play a little bit more because there's an interesting take that comes up in the next couple of minutes, and I want you to hear that. And then if in any of your free time you want to see this whole video, if you're that interested in in this video, man, you can catch the replay. There's another one that I want to get into though.
The coastal migration hypothesis, on the other hand, has been gaining traction recently. The coast may have been relatively free of ice and able to be walked along, or watercraft may have been used. Watercraft is certainly possible from this time period, and later Paleo-Indians are known to have possessed this technology. The coast could have been crossed multiple times throughout the last glacial maximum, which could explain how humans got into the Americas over 20,000 years ago. It would also explain how the first significant wave of people in the Americas was able to spread to South America so quickly. These people traveling along the coast could camp, some moved inland, while others continued south. One can only imagine the sights these people saw along their way. All the beauty of the Americas without obstruction. They witnessed new and unfamiliar beasts of legendary size and power. And despite encountering some of the most fearsome animals since the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs, they thrived. Genetics directly tell us that these people increased their population exponentially in the land of opportunity. The coastal migration theory is currently the best explanation for the peopling of the Americas. Over the last decade, stacking evidence continues to support it. There are other ideas such as the Solutrean hypothesis, which posits that humans from Western Europe migrated over Atlantic ice to reach the Americas.
What do you want?
Want a job that I don't hate.
Evidence, evidence, evidence.
However, genetic and linguistic evidence strongly suggests Native Americans are purely the descendants of Northeast Asians. DNA from the Anzac Boy have confirmed that the Clovis people and Paleo-Indians in general descend from Northeast Asia. The DNA also proved that these people were the direct ancestors of roughly 80% of all living Native Americans in North and South America. The remainder are thought to have descended from later waves of migration. A question yet to be answered is, where did the actual Clovis culture come from? The first people to enter the Americas were likely not making fluted points or other recognizably Clovis material culture. This is likely because it is not thought that the Clovis culture formed until around 13,500 years ago. The Clovis culture appeared rather abruptly throughout much of North America. This made sense under the Clovis first model, but with the discovery of pre-Clovis sites, their origin has become more enigmatic. A Clovis site typically needs to have a Clovis point present to be confidently considered Clovis, though their technology can be identified in other ways. We will talk about this technology later, but it is important to note that this technology seems to have developed within the North American continent. Clovis sites are primarily known from the Great Plains and the East Coast. Western sites do exist, but in the West, another type of point was also being made. These were the Western stemmed points.
This is what I wanted to get to right here. Right? Western stem points. This was a stem tradition. Look at the sites. Look at where they finding them. They got evidence all over the Americas of these people. So if you are Aboriginal, Indigenous, Native American person, and that's what you're claiming, look at these spots where we got all of this evidence. You ain't there. If you light skin like me, brown skin like Sut, or brown skin like Sutek, right? Or black as hell. You're an African American. Could you possess any type of potential genetic admixture from these Indians? Maybe. If you look like Vasa, you have the possibility, Vyasa, right? If you look like him, his high yellow Oklahoma living ass. No shade, but that's where he's from. He's from Oklahoma. There is a possibility that you potentially have some Native American DNA. Potentially. How much? A small, minute, or about whatever the percentage may be. However, None of you that have been online arguing on all these channels and creating YouTube channels and debating everybody have that. None of you, not one. From the dude who says I'm here to make you think, all the way to the last dude that I never known existed named Top Cat that just came out to me yesterday. I mean today. Never heard of him. This is all new. And the reason you can't go beyond the 1800s is because your ass wasn't here. And the only reason you think you one of the 5 civilized tribes or some of these other different native tribes that y'all are just now learning about and trying to claim is because we, for the last 7 years, have been forcing you to learn something about indigenous culture. But the reason you don't know anything about the indigenous culture because you don't know history and you don't know how to follow the evidence. You are not the Paleo Indian. You're not. Absolutely not. You're not the Paleo Indians. You damn sure not the Clovises. They don't even come up with a third type of people in this particular area. There's only one culture that, listen, after the Paleo Indians, the dominant culture that they see is the Clovis. There's no other culture outside of the Clovis for a long period of time. So who were the people after the Clovis? Let me stop sharing real quick before I get into the next bill because I needed to stop sharing. I wanted to get at that point. All right. Who populated? I'm telling y'all what I'm typing into Google. Who populated North America after the Clovis? Everybody can type that up. You can look and see if there is a people after the Clovis that populated the Americas, more specifically North America. You let me know if you find a people after the Clovis. You let me know if you find evidence of a people after the Clovis. You're not going to find nobody after the Clovis. So here's what I'm trying to tell y'all. For a long period of time, the people that we're calling Indians in North America are the Clovises. There's no one else coming up through that gap but them people. There ain't no other people coming in and doing none of that. It's the same people from the Bering Straits and who traveled through seas through them little islands that's real close to Mexico out there. They real small islands. There's no other people. So where is your culture showing up and mingling, or synchronizing with the Clovis culture? There's no other. Their name begins to change. So you mean to tell me that we got evidence of the let's see. How long the Clovis been in? Let's see. Look. It existed roughly through 13,400 to 12,700 years ago. Near the end of the last glacial period is characterized by the main factor, the Clovis points. That's what they're saying. But if we go back to the child that they sequenced the DNA, 2-year-old boy. If we go to the 2-year-old boy, 2-year-old world first person to have extracted a strand of DNA. we go back. That boy was directly ancestral to today's native people from Central and South Americas. That boy DNA is like 12,000 years old. There you go, on the screen. And you can get the source right there. 1 to 2 year old child, now known to be a boy, is directly ancestral to today's native peoples from Central and South America. That sets a bar. That sets a bar. This sets a bar. This is evidence. None of them people that's online arguing with Jabari on Sinetta and all these other channels, they can't even make these type of rock. They can't shave a rock down to make it a point and create a spill. They can't do none of that. So they need to stop capping. Now let's get a little bit into this last little bill, and then I'm gonna come back because I don't know who got some questions, comments, or concerns, or whoever want to argue. But we can get into all of that in just a minute. Because I got one more source after this, and I'm opening the panel.
We
now
are the first peoples.
Look, hold on. Now, listen to me. I ain't playing all this video. It's 3 hours. I ain't got that kind of time. I don't. But what I want to do is I want to show a little bit about the first peoples, and then let it lay out the argument. So I'm gonna be quiet, and I'm gonna let a lot of this talk because it's gonna get into some things that I wanted to get into, but it's probably gonna be about 20 minutes in.
Of the Americas. We have been here from the beginning. Our ancestors navigated by the wind and stars, crossing vast oceans and mountain ranges, searching for new lands. Over thousands of years, our ancestors became astronomers and architects, philosophers and scientists, artists and inventors. We created distinct societies and built vast trade systems that covered 2 continents. In 1492, our world was changed forever, but we did not disappear. Today, the languages and teachings of our ancestors remain. And these are the untold stories of the Americas before Columbus. When did the first people arrive in the Americas? Indigenous creation stories tell how our ancestors emerged as humans from the earth, the water, the sky, and the land below. Some people believe that we walked into the Americas on foot across an ancient land bridge that once connected Asia and North America. Others say we paddled here in ocean-going canoes along the Pacific coastline. There's one thing that all of these views of arrival have in common. They all begin with a journey. By 1491, tens of millions of indigenous people were living in every part of the Americas, from the high Arctic to the southern tip of South America. There were countless indigenous nations, each with their own distinct language and ways of life. But this didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years to build this diverse world from a very small founding population. Since 1492, we've shared our traditional territory with people from every part of the world. Today, we continue our search for the origins of our ancestors and the roots of our cultural identity as Indigenous people.
We have two different
Well, them measures be coming, boy.
different kinds of dates. We have the archaeological date that says probably somewhere between 18 to 20,000 years ago, the first non-native born human came into this hemisphere. In terms of indigenous perspectives, we've always been here. Philosophically, we've never been.
Now, real quick, this guy on the screen that's talking right now, his ass ain't no damn always been here. He's still in the people's culture. I'm just gonna keep it a buck. He's one of those $5 Indians. Him right here. Because he benefits from it because he was able to claim it and manipulate the system to say such and such. He don't even look admixed right.
Been anywhere else.
Every Indigenous nation has its own creation story. These stories have been passed down from generation
What did it say? What did it say?
to generation for
Else.
Every Indigenous nation has its own creation story.
Every Indigenous nation has its own creation story. TP Chief Woo Woo. What is your creation story? Because every people, right? Everybody got one. Except for the new Abo Indigenous black man in America. Meek, I called you, bro.
These stories have been passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years.
So you telling me after thousands and thousands of years of passing down your material culture and story, right? Folklore. See, to us, we used what's the name? What's the name of the people, man? Let's get my mind right now because I was looking to throw a shot at the elbows. But I probably can type it in chat. But griots. We use griots. They passed along history. They might have, you know what I'm saying, finessed it a little bit. Might have been capping a little bit, put an extra sauce on it a little bit. However, the griots told stories of old. Spoke highly in some instances, covered up some stuff in others, and all of that. But there were griots. The presence of griots is known to us. There's nothing that you got going on that matters to us at all. Because you can't tell us nothing. You can't keep saying my grandmama said. Because if your grandmama said, or your auntie said, or your mama said, or your great grandmama said, no matter on what side of the family, where is this creation story on how you came to be? It's passed down. It ain't going nowhere. It was being passed down before white people came to the Americas. That's a fact. So whenever they came to Americas and the native people that was here began to flow west, them stories didn't change because we still have it. And guess what? We have now written documentation on the origin stories of all these different people. Peep game.
Creation stories form a powerful part of each nation's identity and our sense of who we are as a people. In the beginning, There was a great flood. A few animals and birds survived by clinging to a log. Among them was the tiny muskrat. The creatures decided they needed to find land, but the world was covered in water. One by one, they took turns diving deep into the water, looking for some dirt to bring back to the surface. But each animal came back empty-handed. Finally, the tiny muskrat dove under the water. When he came back, he had a paw full of earth. He placed it on the back of a turtle shell. This is how North America became known as Turtle Island.
Oh,
In the beginning,
oh, 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 oh. So you mean to tell me that Turtle Island ain't where they say Turtle Island is? The Aboriginals? The Aboriginals say they come from Turtle Island. This ain't no Turtle Island. The Turtle Island they talking about, they can't even describe where it's at. They talking about some South Carolina area somewhere around there. They don't even show us Turtle Island. But listen, this is the Mayans' creation story, ladies and gentlemen. So the people that claim Turtle Island, are they saying that they're of Mayan descent? Let's continue.
there was only the sea and sky. The gods created the earth and populated it with animals and birds. But the animals couldn't worship them, so they decided to make humans. The first humans were made from mud, but they fell apart too easily. Then the gods made humans from wood, but they had nothing in their minds, so they destroyed them in a flood. Finally, the gods made humans out of maize dough. They had intelligence and knowledge and could worship the gods, so they
Let me
became...
stop. This is the Mayans' creation story. If the Abos who claim to be from Turtle Island, why are they not telling us this story? Why are they not telling us how they were created? The gods created them from clay. This is their story. This is why I say Aboriginal Indigenous of the 2016s is pseudo as hell. They have an identity problem. And until you actually weigh all the evidence and put it together, you're going to end up with these little fake arguments, circular arguments. And they just try to disregard all the evidence. But not no more.
the first people.
History Hit is like Netflix, just for history fans. With exclusive history documentaries covering some of the most famous people and events in history, just for you. With familiar faces such as Dan Jones and Dr.
In the beginning, people lived in the sky, and the only creatures they knew were birds.
This is another people. So we just heard the Mayans. Now we go get into the Warworld's creation story. See, I'm taking y'all somewhere. We know what we know now. They cannot lie. No more. And no point intended, Moors. Y'all need to stop lying too. But y'all can't lie no more.
A young hunter set out one day to find a rare and beautiful bird. When he finally found it, he shot his arrow. And when he went to retrieve it, he discovered a hole in the bottom of the sky. Looking through it, he saw forests and rivers and wild animals. He asked the other hunters to travel to this world with him, but they refused. So he made a rope and lowered it down the hole and climbed down to the world below. He shot a deer and brought it back to the sky world. The others wanted to hunt deer too, so they climbed down the rope. The last person to go through the hole in the sky was a woman, and she became stuck, preventing the people from returning to their home. She can still be seen in the sky as the morning star. Historians have long supported a theory that our ancestors walked into the Americas across an ancient land bridge that connected Asia and North America.
Oh, so these people say they walked across the land bridge. That's what these people say. Lo and behold, the Aboriginal story is getting falsified.
During the last ice age. Until about 13,000 years ago, great sheets of ice, kilometers thick, covered much of the northern sections of North America, Europe, and Asia. But there were some ice-free regions in the northern hemisphere where people lived. One of these regions was known as Beringia. This 1,000-kilometer expanse of land connecting the two continents emerged when glaciers locked up vast quantities of water, causing sea levels to fall more than 100 meters.
You see evidence that people came across a land bridge. You see evidence that a land bridge did exist in the past.
In the northern parts of North America, Alaska, the Yukon, even northern British Columbia, we have a collection of
this game.
Oh, boy.
Not ready for it.
Of some of the most ancient sites across the continent. And of course, that would be up in an area that archaeologists refer to as Beringia.
Hey, by the way, that's a native dude. The dude talking, he a native.
And you know, those people who made it across the land bridge, all they had were their wits and a few stone tools.
Look, here go another one. Here go another one. How many of the elbows look like the last two dudes we just saw?
And yet they managed to explore, discover, colonize two continents. So that's a pretty amazing achievement in the annals of human history. And they did this by being very aware of the environment, of being able to manipulate their environment to their own benefit.
Water between the two continents dropped so low it exposed the bottom of the sea. This arid, prairie-like landscape remained ice-free, and the abundant birds and mammals provided people with food and materials for clothing and shelter. But Beringia was a temporary landscape. Around 20,000 years ago, the world's climate began to warm, and the glaciers started melting. By 15,000 years ago, the rising sea levels had covered up the Beringia land bridge, and people living there either had to return to Siberia or stay in North America. The melting glaciers and rising sea levels created major environmental changes in the northern hemisphere. The land between the two North American ice sheets widened about 12,000 years ago, offering an ice-free corridor for people to travel through.
Historically in archaeology, it was believed that the spread further south into the continent was between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, and this is known as the ice-free corridor hypothesis. And so many researchers are saying this was the gateway into the Americas.
But taking this route south through such a harsh terrain would have involved a tremendous risk.
If they had a people who were up in Alaska and they see this opening between two ice sheets, they're taking a big leap of faith to say, well, maybe we go 1,000 miles south of here, we'll find better land. The ice-free corridor would have been a very dynamic landscape. It would have had terrible winters, like harsh, cold winters, and not much better in the summer. The summers would have been cold and rainy. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity for people to find stable land that they could colonize.
The end of the last ice age set the stage for the movement of people overland into North America. The indigenous people who traveled into the continent on foot from Beringia could not have known it at the time, but they were not the first people to settle south of the ice sheets. In fact, humans had already been living in both North and South America for thousands of years before the glaciers melted and opened up routes south through the ice-free corridor.
I want y'all to think about it. If a people was here and you don't look nothing distinctly like the people that were here, how did you come to be? And I'm talking about we seeing some of the blackest people claim, look how dark they are. They're not even realizing, you know what I'm saying? When they were down there talking about the Incas and the Mayans and all of that, and they was talking about the paint all over them and stuff like that, they was serious about that. They didn't know it was paint. They didn't know that they painted themselves black. They assumed that. But where is this new people, right? That's different from the Paleo Indian and the Clovis culture people. Where is this new different that's been here? Remember they said they've been here. So when did you get here? What route did you take to get here? And then where is your culture? Because you're going to bring that with you. Or if you've always been here, then that shouldn't be similar to the Clovis culture. It should be a total separate culture. And these sites and these distinct areas that we're referring to provide evidence of such. If we have it for them, why we don't have it for you? What's your origin story? Oh, you ain't got one. Your origin story is your mama said, your grandmama said, your auntie said, your granddaddy told you. That ain't no damn origin story. That's a joke.
Glaciers covered much of the northern hemisphere until about 12,000 years ago. As temperatures warmed worldwide, ice melted and sea levels began to rise. These changes to the environment led to animal, bird, and human migration throughout North America, Asia, and Europe. Tens of thousands of years ago, the climates in parts of the Asian subcontinent was much wetter than it is today. In India, the Thar Desert was once a vast, fertile grassland. Hunters following the herds eventually settled permanently in the region.